secluded area just off Combs Hill Road is where 60 years ago, the body of 12-year-old Mary Teresa Simpson was found covered in rocks and debris. The Elmira Police Department says it's now using modern DNA testing to finally solve this cold case.
Well, I only can tell you a little bit because I wasn't home when my sister got murdered.
Linda Galpin says she has been waiting for justice for her younger sister Mary for more than 60 years.
We were very close when we were younger. We went to the neighborhood house. We went to Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts. We did roller skating together. She was a very active person, and she was very...
In 1964, 12-year-old Mary Teresa walked away into the twilight and never returned home. For 6 decades, her family waited anxiously for a name. Police sifted through thousands of pages of files, scoured every nook and cranny, but the killer seemed to have vanished into thin air. What they never expected was that he hadn't fled. He lived peacefully, started a family, and drove past the police station every day. This is the 61-year quest to find the invisible man.
This is a historic day for the Elmira Police Department. Justice after almost 62 years.
When the chief of police steps up to the podium and delivers those heavy, resonant words, you can feel the immense gravity of 6 decades pressing down on the crowded room. Generations of detectives had grown old, retired, and passed away, all while waiting to hear that exact sentence spoken out loud. The sheer emotional relief in the press room is palpable, but to truly understand the monumental weight of this long-awaited justice, we cannot simply look at the end of the journey. We have to rewind the clock. We must leave the bright, flashing camera lights of this modern-day press conference and travel back more than half a century, returning to a much simpler, more trusting era. Elmira, New York, in the early 1960s, was a quiet, tight-knit community, the kind of picturesque upstate town where front doors were routinely left unlocked and children roamed their neighborhoods with complete freedom. It was here that Mary Teresa lived. She was a gentle, remarkably shy, 12-year-old girl who was just trying to navigate the awkward, quiet early years of adolescence. She wasn't the loudest voice in the classroom or the center of attention. Instead, she quietly observed the world around her through a pair of distinctive, thick-rimmed cat-eye glasses. Like many young girls of her generation, she harbored a sweet, innocent adoration for the king of rock and roll. Tucked safely inside her pocketbook was an Elvis Presley fan club card, a small, cherished treasure that anchored her to the typical hopeful dreams of a teenager in the 60s. She was soft-spoken, deeply cherished by her older siblings, and completely untouched by the darker realities of the world. She was the absolute picture of innocence. It was Sunday, March 15th, 1964. The harsh upstate winter was just beginning its slow thaw, leaving a biting, lingering chill in the evening air. Mary had spent a comforting, perfectly ordinary afternoon visiting her mother. Around 6:30 p.m., she cheerfully said her goodbyes, bundled up tightly against the cold, and began the familiar routine walk back toward her father's apartment on the east side of the city. It was a route she had taken before. A few quiet residential blocks lined with familiar family homes, parked cars, and barren trees. But late winter days in upstate New York are deceivingly short. As Mary Teresa walked, the afternoon sun quickly dipped below the horizon, giving way to the last thin minutes of daylight. That rapidly fading twilight now stands as a haunting, chilling omen for what was about to unfold. The streetlights began to flicker on one by one, casting long, stretching shadows across the cold pavement. Families retreated indoors, pulling their curtains shut to gather around their kitchen tables for Sunday dinners, leaving the neighborhood sidewalks entirely deserted. In those fleeting, silent moments, as the cold dusk settled heavily over Elmira, a 12-year-old girl with cat-eye glasses took her final lonely steps into the gathering darkness. She was completely unaware that she was walking away from her family forever, vanishing into the shadows, and leaving behind an agonizing, heart-wrenching mystery that would paralyze an entire city for the next 62 years. When the clock struck 7 on that Sunday evening, Ellsworth Simpson wasn't immediately terrified. He was simply a father waiting for his daughter to walk through the door. But as the minutes ticked by, the quiet evening air grew suffocating. 7 o'clock turned into 8. 8 o'clock crept toward 9. The initial frustration quickly morphed into a cold, paralyzing panic. He began making frantic phone calls, first to his ex-wife Rose, then to relatives, friends, and anyone who might have seen a shy 12-year-old girl in cat-eye glasses walking alone. Every call ended with the exact same terrifying answer. Nobody had seen Mary Teresa since she stepped out into the twilight. By 10:30 p.m., the Elmira Police Department was officially notified, and the agonizing silence of Ellsworth's apartment was quickly replaced by the wail of sirens. What followed was a 96-hour nightmare that completely consumed the city. For 4 agonizing days, law enforcement and desperate civilian volunteers scoured the freezing upstate terrain. Local radio stations broadcasted her description on a continuous loop, pleading for any information. Neighbors looked at each other with newfound suspicion. How could a child simply evaporate from a residential street? Flashlights cut frantically through the pitch-black March nights. Search parties combed the icy banks of the Kemang River, walked through barren parks, and navigated the dense wooded logging roads on the city's southern edge. Every empty garage and dark basement was checked. Meanwhile, Mary's mother, Rose, who was pregnant at the time, sat in excruciating limbo, carrying a new life while desperately praying for the return of another. But the frantic search would not end with a tearful reunion. It ended on Thursday, March 19th, in the most devastating way imaginable. A local man was taking a quiet morning hike with his 2 young sons along Combs Hill Road. It was a familiar, rugged area just outside the city limits, known mostly for its old logging trails. As they navigated the hilly, forested terrain, they noticed something unnatural in the landscape. Beneath a deliberate pile of branches, dirt, and heavy debris lay the tragic answer the entire city had been searching for. Mary Teresa had been found. The scene was chilling, not just because of the devastating loss of a child, but because of the cold, calculated effort taken to conceal her. Heavy stones had been meticulously placed over the site. The sheer weight of the rocks, the largest weighing over 100 pounds, told investigators something terrifying. This was not a fleeting moment of chaos. The phantom who did this possessed the physical strength to move massive stones and the chilling composure to remain at the scene in the freezing dark. He had taken his time, ensuring she would not be easily found, before simply walking away into the night. The discovery shattered the Simpson family beyond repair. The unimaginable grief culminated in a moment so profoundly heartbreaking, it would echo through the decades. At the funeral home, standing before a closed casket, was Mary's 16-year-old sister, Linda. The reality of the wooden box was simply too much for a teenager's mind to process. Her sweet, quiet little sister couldn't be gone.
It affected me real bad. I wanted to jump in the casket. My dad had to pull me back. And I lived through the 2 years of crying and heartache all this time. And like I told everybody, that I did this.
In a moment of pure, blinding grief, Linda lunged forward, desperately trying to climb into the casket to be with her. Relatives had to physically pull the sobbing teenager back, holding her as her world completely collapsed. Rose, heavily pregnant, was forced to bury one daughter while preparing to bring another into a world that suddenly felt unspeakably cruel. The town of Elmira was left paralyzed by a suffocating blanket of fear. A 12-year-old girl had been stolen from their quiet streets, and the person responsible had vanished without a single trace. The police were standing at the edge of a massive, terrifying void, completely unaware that their agonizing search for the truth was only just beginning. When the Elmira Police Department descended upon the wooded, desolate hillside of Combs Hill Road, they were stepping into a deeply frustrating era of criminal investigation. The year was 1964. There were no digital databases, no high-definition surveillance cameras, and certainly no microscopic trace analysis. Police work was a purely analog endeavor, relying entirely on heavy typewriters, endless stacks of handwritten index cards, fingerprint dust, and relentless shoe leather. The detectives who stood in the freezing March air, looking down at the tragic resting place of a 12-year-old girl, were equipped with little more than their notebooks and their instincts. Yet, in that chilling moment of discovery, those investigators possessed something far more valuable than advanced technology. They had an inexplicable, almost prophetic intuition. They knew, looking at the meticulously hidden scene, that the phantom responsible had been incredibly careful. The trail was already growing cold, swept away by the bitter upstate winds. The investigators understood the heartbreaking reality that the primitive tools they carried in their belts might not be enough to bring Mary Teresa's attacker to justice today. But they absolutely refused to accept defeat. Instead of merely processing the scene and moving on, they made a profound decision that would ultimately change the course of history. They decided to freeze time, as one official would later explain at the historic press conference, reflecting on the monumental foresight of those early officers.
64. DNA did not come around as a forensic tool until around 1986. While it wasn't available then, it was still established practice that police collect evidence for solving crimes and prosecution purposes, which officers did at that time. This included clothing, personal effects, and certain evidence at the scene.
They did not simply collect evidence. They treated Mary Teresa's belongings with the utmost reverence. Carefully, with gloved hands, they gathered the fragile remnants of her innocence. They recovered her thick-rimmed cat-eye glasses, the exact same glasses through which she had quietly viewed the world. They secured the beloved Elvis Presley fan club card, a heartbreaking symbol of her interrupted youth, and most importantly, they meticulously preserved the clothing she had been wearing on that fateful Sunday evening. In an era before advanced biological preservation protocols were standard, these detectives made the deliberate choice to seal these items away from the destructive elements. The weathered garments were carefully bagged, tagged, and placed into a freezer deep within the Elmira police headquarters. As the heavy door of that freezer clicked shut, it essentially became a localized time capsule. Outside those walls, the world would rapidly change. Presidents would come and go, wars would be fought, and the small town of Elmira would slowly evolve. The original detectives working the case would eventually grow gray, retire, and pass their heavy files down to the next generation. Every new detective who inherited the towering stacks of case reports would walk past that freezer, carrying the heavy burden of the city's oldest open mystery. But inside that humming, frost-covered unit, the year remained exactly 1964. The officers who locked that door could never have conceptualized the scientific miracles of the 21st century. They didn't know the words genetic genealogy or molecular extraction. They simply had a gut feeling that they owed it to a shy little girl to keep her story safe until the rest of the world could catch up. Sergeant William Goodwin perfectly captured this quiet heroism decades later, stating,
"Despite those limitations, investigators documented the scene, collected physical evidence, and preserved items they believed could be important in the future."
That freezer stood as a silent, icy guardian of the truth. For decades, it hummed quietly in the background, while the phantom who had taken Mary Teresa lived his life in the sunlight, believing he had successfully outsmarted the system. He thought the passage of time was his greatest ally, effectively erasing his footsteps and washing away his guilt. But he was entirely wrong. Time was not erasing the evidence. Time was simply waiting. The brilliant, forward-thinking detectives of 1964 had successfully captured his invisible shadow, locking it in the ice, patiently guarding the fragile threads of justice until the day science could finally give them a voice. Back in the months immediately following March 1964, the Elmira Police Department threw absolutely everything they had at the Mary Teresa case. Detectives drank terrible diner coffee late into the night, knocking on every single door, chasing down every fleeting rumor, and conducting over 300 formal interviews. They built a massive mountain of paperwork, thousands upon thousands of pages, of deeply detailed reports, alibis, and cross-referenced tip sheets. The community was entirely on edge, desperate to help. A local radio station and the city newspaper even teamed up to offer a $1,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest. By 1972, that reward had ballooned to $5,000, a small fortune for a working-class town back then. But the phone never rang. The money sat there in a bank account, completely untouched. Nobody came forward, and nobody whispered a name, simply because the phantom they were desperately looking for hadn't left a single visible trace behind. As the 1960s faded into the 70s, and the 70s gave way to the neon glow of the 80s, the investigation hit a massive, agonizing brick wall. The initial frantic urgency slowly transformed into a quiet, heavy institutional sorrow. The original detectives who had stood on that freezing hillside began to gray. They packed up their desks, handed in their badges, and headed into retirement. But before they walked out the door, they passed that towering case file down to the next generation of rookies. Those new officers would read through the exact same stacks of paper, hoping beyond hope to catch a missed detail, only to hit the exact same frustrating dead ends. Mary Teresa's file became the department's oldest open mystery. It wasn't just a collection of reports anymore. It was a heavy shadow that followed every incoming detective, a ghost story that lived permanently in the filing cabinets. Then, the calendar flipped to a new millennium. The early 2000s brought a wave of scientific miracles that the original detectives could only have dreamed of. The frozen time capsule was finally opened. Scientists at the State Police Laboratory meticulously examined the clothing that had been preserved in the ice for nearly 40 years. Amazingly, the foresight of the 1964 investigators paid off. The lab found microscopic genetic material. They successfully built a pristine DNA profile of the unknown man. After decades of complete darkness, the police finally held the Phantom's genetic fingerprint. All they had to do was plug it into CODIS, the FBI's massive national database of convicted offenders, and wait for the computer to spit out a name. The investigators gathered around, holding their breath. They ran the search. The system scanned millions of records, and then nothing. 0 matches. The screen came back completely empty. Refusing to give up, they tried again in 2003, with an upgraded profile, and once more in 2014. 3 devastating dead ends. The man who had taken Mary Teresa had never been entered into the national system. He was a true ghost. Real quick, before we dive into how the police finally managed to outsmart this invisible man, if you are finding yourself captivated by the relentless dedication of these detectives, please take just a second to hit that subscribe button and give this video a quick like. It really helps the channel grow, and it allows us to keep digging deep into these incredible forgotten mysteries. We read every single comment, so let me know down below how incredibly frustrated would you be if you were one of those detectives in 2014, staring at a blank computer screen after a 50-year wait. The frustration inside the Elmira Police Department was immeasurable. They had the science, they had the undeniable evidence, but the door remained stubbornly locked. District Attorney Whedon Wetmore perfectly summarized this grueling, seemingly endless waiting game when he later stood before the cameras, stating,
in this case, oftentimes people say the wheels of justice move slowly, and in this case, they moved inexorably to a conclusion. And the conclusion, based upon all that they presented to me, is clearly that this gentleman is the person that killed Mary Teresa Simpson. And counsel or rather the chief is correct when he said, if he were alive today, we would prosecute the case because indeed there is no statute of limitations on murder.
But in the mid-2010s, those wheels felt like they had completely rusted in place. The 60-year dead end seemed utterly impossible to break. Little did they know, the answer wasn't hiding in a government database at all. It was hiding in the sprawling family trees of ordinary citizens, just waiting for the right moment to be dragged out into the light. To truly grasp the profound tragedy of a cold case, you have to understand how time moves differently for those left behind. For the rest of the world, the clock ticks forward. The clock ticks forward. But for the family of a victim, time completely stops. Linda Galpin, who was just 16 years old when she desperately tried to climb into her little sister's casket, carried that suffocating grief into her adulthood. She grew older, but a piece of her soul remained permanently frozen in 1964. For decades, Linda became the relentless, beating heart of the investigation. Every single year, without fail, she would pick up the phone and call the Elmira Police Department. She would ask the detectives the exact same question, hoping for a different outcome. And every single year, the response was a polite but heartbreaking echo. Nothing new. The file hasn't moved. Meanwhile, Mary Teresa's parents aged under the crushing weight of unanswered questions. Ellsworth passed away first. Then Rose, the mother, who had been carrying one daughter into the world while burying another, also passed away. They both left this earth without ever knowing the name of the man who shattered their family. For them, the Phantom was a faceless monster who had seemingly vanished into thin air. But here's where the story takes a deeply unsettling, infuriating turn. If we utilize a split-screen narrative to look at this tragedy, the contrast is enough to make your blood boil. On one side of the screen, you have a family drowning in a lifetime of tears, making desperate annual phone calls, and visiting a quiet grave. On the other side of the screen, you have the Phantom. But he wasn't a phantom at all. He didn't flee across the country. He didn't assume a fake identity, and he didn't hide in a dark cave. He was a living, breathing man who was experiencing a completely normal, uninterrupted life. He lived right there, in the exact same upstate city. He was a truck driver. He spent his days navigating the familiar streets of Elmira, driving his delivery routes along the very same back roads and quiet logging trails where he had left Mary Teresa. He went home at the end of his shifts. He got married and raised children. As the decades rolled by and the reward money sat uncollected, he calmly watched his own children grow up, eventually experiencing the joy of becoming a grandfather. He breathed the same air as Linda. He shopped at the same local stores. He almost certainly drove past the Elmira Police Department on countless occasions, completely unbothered, comfortably hiding in plain sight. How does a man commit such an atrocity and never cross paths with an investigation that interviewed over 300 locals? That is the question that haunted the community. The answer, revealed during the tense, emotionally charged press conference in 2026, delivered the ultimate punch to the gut. During the briefing, a reporter in the crowd asked a piercing question.
Elmira Police's radar before this?
He was no... Sorry, go ahead, dear.
Sorry. Mentioning his kind of criminal history, he was in trouble here and there.
He was known to the Elmira Police at the time, and that's as far as we're going to put out at the moment. So he was known to the Elmira Police Department at the time. So frequently known to the Elmira Police Department at the time over the decades that this went on. So
the room fell dead, silent as the police representative stepped up to the microphone and delivered a chilling confirmation.
What I can say is that he was known to police at that time, so that's it.
Will there be a time when that information might be released?
Will not.
Probably not.
He was known. He wasn't a brilliant mastermind who had entirely evaded the justice system. He had a documented criminal history involving other troubling offenses. He was in their filing cabinets. The police had interacted with him over the years, yet through a tragic combination of primitive filing systems, lack of communication between departments, and pure, blinding luck, his name was never once connected to the mountain of paperwork in Mary Teresa's specific homicide file. It is a staggering, infuriating realization. Two entirely different timelines played out simultaneously within the borders of one small city. One family waited in absolute agony for a name, while the man carrying that name comfortably lived out his golden years. He believed he had successfully taken his dark secret to the grave, confident that the world would never realize the friendly neighbor and grandfather was actually the monster they had been hunting all along, and for a very long time, it seemed like he was going to get away with it. By the time 2022 arrived, the case of Mary Teresa had reached a fragile, desperate precipice. The department was running out of options, and the physical evidence locked inside the freezer was slowly degrading with every passing year. However, a glimmer of hope finally pierced through the decades of darkness. The Elmira Police Department, refusing to let the ghost win, applied for and received a specialized grant from a nonprofit organization called Season of Justice. This critical funding provided them with one final, unprecedented opportunity, sending the evidence to Othram, a cutting-edge private laboratory in Texas known for performing absolute miracles with degraded historical evidence. But this was not a simple procedural step. It was an incredibly high stakes, terrifying gamble. The scientists were looking at a sample that was nearly 60 years old, having survived decades of shifting temperatures and primitive storage methods. What remained of the Phantom's genetic fingerprint was so minuscule, it bordered on non-existent. Sergeant William Goodwin highlighted the sheer impossibility of the task, stating,
As mentioned, we were working with approximately 0.4 nanograms of DNA. To put that in perspective, that is an extremely small amount of biological material, which is invisible to the naked eye.
This invisible microscopic fragment was the very last thread connecting the Phantom to his terrible crime. And here was the terrifying catch. The advanced analysis process is inherently destructive. There are no do-overs. If the lab proceeded and failed to build a usable profile, that 0.4 nanogram would be completely consumed. The evidence would vanish forever, taking the identity of the perpetrator into the eternal darkness, leaving the family with nothing. The investigators had to take a deep breath, weigh the agonizing risks, and push all their remaining chips to the center of the table. They authorized the test. The precious, invisible sample was carefully packed into a secure container, heavily loaded with dry ice to keep it perfectly preserved, and handed over to a courier service for overnight shipping to Texas. After 60 years of waiting, the answer was finally in transit. And then, the universe threw one last heart-stopping curveball. A historic, paralyzing winter storm suddenly swept across the country, completely shutting down the massive shipping hub in Memphis, Tennessee. The package carrying Mary Teresa's final hope was abruptly grounded, lost somewhere in a colossal, frozen warehouse containing millions of stranded parcels. Panic immediately set in among the investigators. The dry ice preserving the fragile evidence had a strict expiration clock. If the ice sublimated completely before the package reached the Texas lab, the biological material would rapidly degrade, rendering it entirely useless. The 60-year wait would end not with justice, but with a melted, tragic failure caused by a simple weather anomaly. It was a race against time that felt pulled straight from a Hollywood thriller. An FBI agent assisting with the case desperately reached out to liaisons at the Memphis facility. In a remarkable display of determination, personnel physically waded through the freezing, chaotic warehouse, treating it like a massive, desperate scavenger hunt. With the dry ice clock ticking down to its final hours, they miraculously located the small, unassuming box hidden among the mountains of delayed freight. They rushed it into a secure bureau freezer just as the storm raged outside, keeping the ghost's invisible fingerprint safe until the skies finally cleared. When the ice melted on the runways and the planes were cleared for takeoff, the package finally touched down in Texas. The desperate gamble had survived the storm. Now it was entirely up to the scientists to see if that invisible 0.4 nanogram could finally bring the Phantom out of the shadows. The miracle in the Texas laboratory was only the first half of the battle. Othram's brilliant scientists had managed the impossible. From that infinitesimally small, nearly lost 0.4 nanogram sample, they successfully extracted a complete, pristine genetic blueprint of the Phantom. But a blueprint is not a name. It is merely a complex string of biological code. When this new, highly detailed profile was uploaded to public genetic genealogy databases, the system did not instantly spit out a mugshot. Instead, it provided a sprawling, chaotic constellation of distant cousins. The high-tech portion of the investigation was over. What came next was an agonizing, painstaking dive into deep history. The Phantom had spent his entire life believing he had successfully outsmarted the justice system. He felt entirely secure in the knowledge that his genetic footprint was not sitting in any traditional law enforcement database. He was a ghost in the machine. But what he could never have anticipated was that his own distant relatives, people he had likely never even met, would be his ultimate undoing. By simply submitting their own DNA to commercial ancestry companies to learn about their family heritage, everyday citizens had unknowingly built a roadmap leading right to his door. To bridge the gap between a nameless string of code and a living, breathing suspect, the Elmira Police Department and the FBI enlisted an incredibly dedicated team. They partnered with the Criminal Investigation Resource Center at Russell Sage College, where Dr. Christina Lane and a group of relentless college students stepped into the 60-year-old mystery. Together with federal agents, they formed a specialized task force entirely devoted to forensic genetic genealogy. Their mission was to build a massive family tree from scratch, starting with distant relatives and working their way toward the center of the web. This was not the kind of fast-paced detective work you see in the movies. It was a slow, grueling marathon of patience versus time. The investigators essentially had to become professional historians. They started with matches that were sometimes as distant as fifth or sixth cousins, meaning they had to trace the bloodlines all the way back to the 1800s, just to find a common ancestor. From that distant point in the past, they had to meticulously trace every single branch of the family tree forward in time, generation by generation, decade by decade. The team spent more than 2 years buried in the quiet, dusty corners of history. They combed through countless digitized census records from the early 20th century. They analyzed yellowing, faded birth certificates, deciphered handwritten marriage licenses, and scoured thousands of local newspaper obituaries. Every time they found a new branch of the family, they had to cross-reference it against geographical data. Did this specific branch migrate to the West Coast? Did this family line stay in Europe? If the relatives didn't live anywhere near upstate New York in the spring of 1964, that branch was crossed off the list. It was a monumental puzzle consisting of tens of thousands of pieces, and the students and agents had to place every single one perfectly. Month after month, they meticulously eliminated hundreds and then thousands of innocent people. The sprawling genetic web slowly began to tighten. The branches of the family tree started to converge, pointing away from distant states and focusing intensely on the northeastern United States. Then, the focus narrowed to New York State. Finally, the historical documents led them straight back to the very city where the nightmare had begun, Elmira. While the rest of the world moved on, this quiet team of students and agents sat in front of glowing computer screens late into the night, piecing together the broken fragments of a fractured family lineage. They were fighting against the ultimate enemy of cold cases, time itself. Records get lost, names change, and memories fade. But the genetic code simply does not lie. By 2025, the massive, sprawling family tree had been pruned down from thousands of potential candidates to just a handful of individuals. They looked for a male in the family who was the right age, living in the right location, and driving the right roads during that fateful March week. Through pure, unyielding perseverance, the vast web finally closed in on a single point. The decades of wandering through the dark were over. The historical documents aligned perfectly with the genetic blueprint, and the phantom who had haunted Elmira for over half a century finally had a name. The genetic web had finally tightened its grip. After 2 exhaustive years of navigating through centuries of birth certificates, marriage licenses, and fading census records, the dedicated genealogy team, working alongside the FBI, had eliminated thousands of potential branches. The sprawling, complex family tree finally collapsed into a single, undeniable focal point. The invisible, microscopic sample recovered from the frozen time capsule pointed directly to one man, Alfred Raymond Murray Jr. The detectives finally had their phantom. They had the name of the man who had lived his entire life in Elmira, hiding perfectly in plain sight.
This is a historic day for the Elmira Police Department, justice after almost 62 years.
Simpson was reported missing on March 15, 1964. Her body found 4 days later, hidden in a wooded area off of Combs Hill Road. Investigators say advancements in DNA testing and genetic genealogy led them to Alfred R. Murray Jr. of Elmira, who died in 2004. Officials say Murray had no known connection to Simpson or her family.
For decades, the individual connected to the forensic evidence in this case was known only as John Doe. Through investigative genetic genealogy, that individual was identified as Alfred Murray Jr.
Naturally, the immediate instinct for any investigator in this scenario is to rush to the suspect's doorstep, put him in handcuffs, and finally sit him down in the cold interrogation room to demand answers. But when law enforcement moved to locate their prime suspect, they were hit with a staggering, deeply frustrating reality. Murray was completely beyond the reach of traditional justice. He had passed away more than 2 decades earlier, in 2004. However, it wasn't simply the fact that he had died that sent a collective shiver down the spines of the investigators. It was the highly specific date of his passing. Alfred Murray Jr. took his final breath and died on March 19, 2004. That date was not just a random, insignificant day on the calendar. March 19th was exactly 40 years, to the very day. That 12-year-old Mary Teresa's concealed body was tragically discovered beneath the heavy stones on Combs Hill Road. For a man who had completely evaded the law for his entire life, the universe seemed to deliver a chilling, cosmic reminder of his dark secret on the exact day he left this earth. Hey everyone, just a quick pause before we get into the absolutely wild, unprecedented lengths the police went to next to prove his guilt. If you are captivated by this incredible 60-year pursuit of truth, please take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button and leave a like on the video. It costs you nothing, but it means the absolute world to the channel and helps us keep bringing you these deep dive historical mysteries. Now, let's get back to how they caught a ghost. While the eerie date of his death felt like a form of poetic closure, a cosmic coincidence was simply not enough to officially close the oldest open case file in the city's history. The law requires absolute, undeniable certainty. The familial DNA match strongly suggested Murray was the culprit, but to definitively prove it, the authorities needed to match the evidence directly to his personal genetic profile. Because he had been buried for over 20 years, there was only one possible way to achieve that level of scientific certainty. They had to go get him. In a move that highlighted their absolute, unwavering commitment to the victim, the Elmira Police Department, in coordination with the District Attorney's Office, sought a highly unusual court order. They requested authorization for a formal exhumation. This was an unprecedented step for the department, a clear, powerful signal that they would stop at nothing, not even the boundary of the grave, to secure the truth. In November 2025, the quiet peace of a local Elmira cemetery was broken. The scene was surreal and heavy with historical weight. Under a gray, overcast autumn sky, a team of board-certified forensic anthropologists, alongside local law enforcement, gathered around a gravesite that had been undisturbed for 20 years. Heavy machinery slowly rolled onto the damp grass. The chilling mechanical hum of the equipment echoed through the rows of headstones, serving as a stark contrast to the absolute silence that had protected his secret for decades. As the earth was carefully pulled away, section by section, the investigators stood in solemn silence. They were physically unearthing the past, dragging the phantom out of the comfortable darkness where he thought he was safe forever. When the vault was finally opened and the biological samples were successfully retrieved by the specialists, a profound sense of finality washed over the cemetery. The man who had evaded over 300 interviews, who had calmly driven his truck past police cruisers, and who had watched a family grieve from afar, was finally facing the truth. The loop of darkness was closing, the ghost had been pulled back into the light, and science was about to deliver its final, undeniable verdict. Once the grim, unprecedented task of the cemetery concluded, the newly recovered biological samples were immediately transported under heavy guard to the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. For the dedicated investigators who had devoted their entire careers to this cold case, these final days of waiting were arguably the most excruciating. They had chased a faceless phantom for 62 years. They had combed through thousands of fading pages, hit dead end after agonizing dead end, and miraculously tracked down a microscopic fragment of evidence through a massive winter storm. Now the final puzzle piece was sitting on a sterile laboratory table. The scientists carefully extracted the genetic material directly from the exhumed remains and placed it side by side with the invisible profile perfectly preserved from Neen 1864. When the lab director finally called the Elmira Police Department with the official results, the words spoken over the phone permanently shifted the gravity in the room. It was an absolute, undeniable match. To help the detectives understand the sheer, overwhelming weight of this confirmation, the forensic scientists provided a staggering mathematical statistic: the probability of selecting an unrelated random individual from the global population who would produce this exact same genetic result was less than 1 in 320 billion. Considering the entire human population on Earth is just over 8 billion, the science left absolutely zero room for doubt. The ghost was finally definitively cornered. With the scientific absolute locked firmly into place, the authorities could finally drag the phantom's true identity into the unforgiving light of day. His name was Alfred Raymond Murray Jr. Born in Elmira in 1931, he was a Korean War veteran who had returned home to live a remarkably quiet, ordinary life. He secured a steady, reliable job as a commercial truck driver, spending decades navigating the vast network of local routes for a moving company. Because of his daily profession, he intimately knew every single back road, every hidden shortcut, and every desolate logging trail on the city's southern edge. He knew the dark, wooded hills of Combs Hill Road like the back of his hand. For his entire adult life, Murray wore a meticulously crafted mask of decency. To the outside world, to his neighbors, and even to his own family, he was simply a hard-working veteran, a loyal husband, a father, and eventually a smiling grandfather. When he passed away in 2004, his local obituary painted a glowing picture of a respectable man who had dutifully served his country and lovingly raised a family in his hometown. His dark, terrible secret was buried right alongside him, wrapped securely in the comfortable illusion of a life well lived. He died believing he had successfully fooled everyone. The most agonizing reality for the detectives, and especially for Mary Teresa's grieving, exhausted family, was the cold, hard truth of mortality. There would be no dramatic, satisfying arrest. Law enforcement could not kick down his front door in the middle of the night. They could not place cold steel handcuffs on his wrists, march him through a chaotic crowd of flashing cameras, or sit him in a courtroom to face the sister whose life he had destroyed. Alfred Raymond Murray Jr. had effectively escaped the physical confines of a prison cell by dying 20 years too early. However, while he may have escaped physical incarceration, the relentless pursuit of science and dedicated police work delivered a different, profoundly powerful form of justice. By exhuming his remains and mathematically proving his guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt, the investigators completely obliterated the false legacy he had left behind. The mask of the honorable veteran and loving grandfather was permanently ripped away, exposing the cowardly monster hiding underneath. His name was finally written into history, not as a respected citizen of Elmira, but as the man who took a shy 12-year-old girl with cat-eye glasses from her family. This undeniable, scientifically proven truth was the final judgment, a delayed, yet absolute sentence that stripped him of his most prized possession, his disguise. The phantom was no longer invisible. He was finally permanently known. As the echoes of the historic press conference finally began to settle in the crowded room, the palpable tension of 62 agonizing years slowly evaporated into the cold winter air. The Elmira Police Department had done the impossible. They had reached across the decades, braved a historic storm, and utilized the absolute pinnacle of modern science to pull a ghost out of the shadows. But beyond the staggering mathematics, the exhumations, and the brilliant detective work, the true, beating heart of this incredible resolution sat quietly in the front row of the audience. Linda Galpin was no longer the frantic, heartbroken 16-year-old girl who had desperately tried to climb into a wooden casket in the desolate spring of 1964. She was now 78 years old, a woman who had lived an entire lifetime in the shadow of an unsolvable mystery. Through every personal milestone, every changing season, and every passing decade, she had carried the heavy, sorrowful memory of her shy little sister. In her mind, Mary Teresa never aged. She remained the quiet, gentle 12-year-old girl with the thick-rimmed cat-eye glasses, holding tightly to an Elvis Presley fan club card. While the world moved rapidly on, Linda had stubbornly refused to let the memory of that innocent child fade into the background.
After decades of unanswered questions, her family is finally learning the truth behind a case that haunted them for more than 60 years.
It sounds like it's justice, so it's going to take me a little while for it to sink in. And I thank everybody for all their help, how they did.
When Linda finally stood up to speak to the flashing cameras and the silent room, her voice carried the profound exhaustion and the bittersweet relief of a lifetime spent waiting. She thanked the relentless investigators from the bottom of her heart, her shoulders visibly dropping as she finally exhaled a breath she had been holding for over 6 decades. Yet, amidst the profound gratitude, there was an undeniable, heartbreaking undercurrent of sorrow. She softly wished her mother could have been there to see it. Ellsworth and Rose, the parents who had endured the ultimate, unimaginable nightmare, had passed away long before the science caught up with the phantom. They left this world without ever knowing the truth, their final days shadowed by an unresolved, agonizing absence. Before we close the book on this incredible emotional journey, if this story of enduring love and relentless justice resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. We dedicate ourselves to making sure forgotten stories like Mary Teresa's are brought into the light, and having you in our community helps us ensure these vital voices are never truly silenced. Thank you for walking through history with us. Even though her parents were gone, Linda's unwavering dedication ensured that their silent prayers were eventually answered. By picking up the phone year after year, by refusing to let the local police department file the paperwork away in a forgotten basement, Linda became the ultimate guardian of her sister's legacy. The resolution of this 60-year mystery is a towering testament to the sheer power of memory and the unyielding nature of love. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that no matter how deep a dark secret is buried, and no matter how many years seamlessly pass by, innocent souls are never truly forgotten. The truth, no matter how severely delayed, has an inevitable, unstoppable way of rising to the surface. As we finally close the heavy weathered cover of Elmira's oldest case file, we are left with a vital, enduring lesson. Mary Teresa's story is a haunting reminder of the fragility of innocence. The phantom who took her did not look like a terrifying monster. He looked like a completely normal, everyday neighbor. He navigated the same quiet streets, smiled at the same grocery store clerks, and lived seamlessly within the community. It is a stark, powerful reminder to talk to the children in your life. Teach them about safe routes, trusted adults, and the absolute right to speak up if something ever feels wrong. Predators rely entirely on silence and shadows to survive, but when a community remains vigilant, when neighbors look out for one another, and when we adamantly refuse to let the vulnerable walk alone in the fading twilight, we make it infinitely harder for the monsters to hide.